as an actor, we're put in the ring and we're told, feel, like really feel, like real tears, real emotions, skin changing, like really, really be.
At 56, Nicole Kidman filmed scenes so intense she admitted they left her physically overwhelmed. At 57, she sat through a divorce she never wanted. At 58, she walked into an interview and said something that stopped the room. This is the same woman who nearly quit Lucille Ball after death threats online. The same woman who shaved her eyebrows for a role and stayed in character for months. The same woman whose own kids were raised inside a world she couldn't reach. Now she's alone again. And instead of hiding, she dropped a bombshell that even her closest circle didn't expect. Nobody was prepared for what came next. Nicole Kidman entered the world in a place that did not match where her life would actually unfold. She was born in Honolulu, Hawaii, on June 20, 1967, while her Australian parents were in the United States on student visas at the University of Hawaii. Her father, Anthony, was studying biochemistry, and the family never planned to stay in America for long, yet her birthplace still mattered. Because she was born on American soil, she automatically qualified for U.S. citizenship. And because her parents were Australian, she also inherited Australian citizenship. So from the beginning, she belonged to two countries at once, even if she would grow up with Australia in her voice and in her bones. Not long after her birth, her parents moved to Washington, D.C., and the atmosphere around her was anything but quiet. They became active in anti-Vietnam War protests, marching through the streets of the U.S. Capitol and demanding peace. Nicole was only a baby, but she was often carried along in her mother's arms while chants rose and signs lifted, and that early contrast settled into her story. She started life surrounded by loud public conviction, yet later she would be known for craving privacy, as if she spent years trying to find a calm place after beginning in a storm. When she was around 3, the family returned to Australia and settled in Longaville, a leafy suburb on Sydney's North Shore. The setting was ordinary and gentle, but people around her noticed something unusual in the girl herself. She attended Lane Cove Public School and later North Sydney Girls High, and teachers saw an intensity that did not fit her age, like she was reading the room more than she was trying to lead it. While other kids argued and rushed, she listened and watched, tracking moods and small shifts in expression, as if feelings were something you could study and map. That way of watching people connected easily to the first place she found a stage. From the age of 3, she was in ballet, learning control and posture before she even knew what acting could be. Then, when she was 6, a simple school Christmas pageant gave her a role that sounds funny now, but mattered a lot then. She was cast as a sheep, and she had to shuffle across the stage and bleat in front of a crowd. Instead of freezing, she felt a rush. There was something about stepping into a part, even a silly one, and feeling the room turn its attention toward you, and realizing you could hold it. At home, there was another influence shaping her, and it was deeper than applause. Her father, Dr. Anthony Kidman, was not only a scientist, he was also a clinical psychologist and a mental health researcher in Australia. He wrote and spoke about anxiety, depression, and cognitive behavioral therapy, and he pushed for early support for young people struggling with mental health. That meant her childhood conversations were often about what people carry inside, about fear, trauma, and the way the mind can twist reality. Without trying to, she was being trained to notice what others hide. And later, that skill would show up in the roles where she felt almost too real. Then, when she was 14, life pressed hard on her family, and the world stopped feeling like school and dance and dreams. Her mother, Janelle, was diagnosed with breast cancer, and Nicole's teenage years suddenly became shaped by care and responsibility. She dropped parts of her usual routine and focused on helping at home, even learning massage techniques at a local institute so she could bring her mother some physical relief. Night after night, she watched the people she loved deal with pain and exhaustion, and it changed her. It did not just make her tougher, it made her more tuned in to suffering, and that sensitivity later became part of what audiences felt when they watched her. By 16, she was working in a way that hinted at the force she would become, even if she still looked like a shy Australian teenager. In 1983, she appeared in the family adventure film Bush Christmas, playing Helen Thompson, a stubborn farm girl who refuses to wait for adults to fix things. She rides a horse, chases thieves through rough bushland, and fights to save her family's farm. The film was shot deep in Queensland, far from city comfort, with real trails, real heat, long days, bruises from falls, and pressure that did not care how young she was. It was a harsh first test, and it taught her early that acting was not only a pretty dream, it could be physical and demanding and unforgiving. A few years later, the shift was dramatic because the roles stopped being warm and safe and started cutting straight into fear. In 1989, she starred in Dead Calm, and the story gave her nowhere to hide. She played Ray Ingram, a grieving woman whose marriage is cracking after the loss of a child. And then a strange man appears from a sinking ship and turns their quiet sea journey into a nightmare. Her husband disappears overboard, and she is left on a yacht with a dangerous stranger who keeps moving closer. What makes it tense is the way she has to survive using her mind, pretending, flirting, stalling, finding seconds wherever she can, while terror sits behind her eyes. Director Philip Noyce later spoke about how fearless she was in those tight scenes, and the industry noticed too, because it did not feel like a young actress playing fear. It felt like someone who understood it. That same year, she also filmed the TV miniseries Bangkok Hilton, and it showed another side of her strength. She played Kat Stanton, a young Australian woman who is tricked by her boyfriend into carrying heroin and ends up trapped in a Thai prison known for cruelty and overcrowding. Inside, she faces corrupt guards, hardened inmates, and the slow grind of psychological pressure. And the story turns her from innocent to scarred, in a way viewers could not look away from. Australian audiences were pulled in, and the performance traveled beyond Australia as well, because it proved she could carry heavy, morally dark material for hours, not just in a single film. By then, Hollywood attention started circling, and it did not come quietly. A powerful New York agent, Sam Cohn, saw Dead Calm and was so impressed that he reportedly flew to Australia because he believed she was a rare kind of talent. People later repeated that he talked about her as the most exciting raw Australian talent in years. And in an industry that loves a headline, that kind of praise spreads fast. Suddenly, she was not only a promising actress, she was a name that executives whispered about as if they had discovered something first. Still, she did not immediately run toward every offer. She turned down scripts that felt shallow, worried about being boxed in too early, and waited for something that felt like a real step instead of a quick grab. That moment came when Philip Noyce recommended her to Tom Cruise for Days of Thunder, the 1990 racing blockbuster about a cocky NASCAR driver. Cruise watched Dead Calm at Noyce's urging and pushed for her to be cast as the neurosurgeon who becomes his character's love interest. It became her first major Hollywood lead, and it forced Los Angeles to see her as more than an interesting discovery from Australia. From there, the public story turned into a romance story, and it moved fast enough to feel unreal. Their relationship ignited around that period, and tabloids followed every step. Cruz, who was then 28, had filed for divorce from Mimi Rogers not long before the film was underway, and the timing became part of the gossip that never really stopped. Over the years, some accounts claimed there was overlap and behind-the-scenes drama, while others pushed back against those claims, and the truth of private moments often gets swallowed by rumor. What is clear is that Nicole later described the pull between them as immediate, and she also spoke about how young she was at the time, how impulsive and naive she felt looking back. Their wedding added to the sense of speed. In 1990, just months after Days of Thunder, they married on Christmas Eve in a short civil ceremony in Telluride, Colorado, with only a small group present and no big public celebration. The secrecy only fed more speculation, especially because Cruz's connection to Scientology was already a topic of public discussion, and people argued about how much the church shaped his life. Some stories went further and claimed church leaders influenced decisions inside the marriage, but those claims are disputed and often come from secondhand sources, so they should be treated like allegations rather than settled fact. Still, even the presence of that conversation tells you how early the relationship carried an extra shadow that other couples did not have. Then, the private pain arrived, and it did not care about fame. Nicole suffered an ectopic pregnancy, a life-threatening condition that required emergency surgery, and it left her grieving as well as frightened. She later spoke about the yearning and the loss, and how it stays with you, aching and heavy. After that, fear around pregnancy became real, and in the years that followed, they adopted 2 children, Isabella in 1992 and Connor in 1995. The family looked complete from the outside, but the inside of it was more complicated because it was built alongside loss, intense public attention, and constant pressure. When the marriage ended in 2001, the split did not just break a relationship, it shook her whole identity. She was 33, 10 years into a life where her name was often attached to his, and then suddenly she was alone in the spotlight. In a raw interview later, she described feeling both freed and devastated at the same time, like the ground had disappeared under her feet while a door opened in front of her. She also spoke about how people in Hollywood reacted, how some seemed to pull away as if divorce made her contagious, and how the chaos around the breakup drew attention so intense it felt like a swarm. Yet what she did next is where the story turns sharp. Because she did not fade, she sprinted. That same year she made Moulin Rouge, playing Satine, a glamorous courtesan in 1899 Paris, living inside glitter and love songs while dying of tuberculosis. During that period, her personal life was collapsing, but on set, she threw herself into the work, singing, dancing, pushing through injuries, and creating a performance that felt like heartbreak dressed in velvet. Moulin Rouge became a major hit and earned her huge recognition, and it was hard not to see the connection between her real pain and the burning emotion she put on screen. She also starred in The Others, filmed in Spain as a mother living in a foggy mansion after World War II, convinced ghosts are haunting her light-sensitive children. The film relied on tension rather than gore, and its twist is still remembered because it flips the entire fear onto its head. Released in the same year as Moulin Rouge, it showed her range in a way that silenced anyone who thought she only had one lane. Then she went even further, choosing roles that erased glamour and demanded transformation. In The Hours, she disappeared into Virginia Woolf with a prosthetic nose, weight gain, and a severe look that made her almost unrecognizable. The performance won her the biggest awards, including the Oscar, and people saw it as more than a career win. It felt like proof that she was not rebuilding herself by playing safe. She was rebuilding by taking risks that could have failed publicly. Around this time, another pain sat quietly in the background, and it is still talked about because it involves her children. After the divorce, the kids were raised closely within Cruise's world, and because Scientology was a major part of his life, it became part of the public narrative around their family too. Reports over the years have claimed that the church's rules about distancing from non-members played a role in how often Nicole could see them, and some stories even used harsh labels like suppressive person. Though those details are difficult to confirm and are often contested, what can be said without turning it into gossip is simple and heavy. Nicole has spoken cautiously and rarely about the situation, but when she does, the emotion is clear, because it is the kind of loss that does not get solved by success. Even when her career hit rough patches, she kept moving, and that stubborn forward motion became part of her identity. Some projects underperformed, and critics were brutal, and industry whispers about fading star power started circling like they always do, especially toward women as they age. But she kept choosing work that challenged her, sometimes punishing work. In Dogville, directed by Lars von Trier, she performed on a bare soundstage marked like a map, pushing emotion to a breaking point again and again through endless takes. And the film's cruelty mirrored a world turning against a single woman. In Cold Mountain, she committed to the harshness of survival, training and researching, learning tasks that made the body ache, and stripping away polish until she looked like a person carved by hardship. It started with a room full of glitter, cameras, and famous faces. But what mattered most that night was one quick introduction that changed everything for Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban. On January 15, 2005, at the G-Day USA Gala in Los Angeles, actor Geoffrey Rush brought them together while the event celebrated top Australians, including Mel Gibson. Nicole felt the spark right away. She did not play it cool either. She got Keith's number, held onto it, and waited for the moment that would turn a crush into something real. But then, the waiting became the story. Keith did not call for 4 months, and it was not because he did not feel anything. He later admitted he was not in a healthy place, and his past addictions made him feel unworthy of her. So while Nicole sat with that quiet hope, Keith sat with fear. When he finally picked up the phone, the silence between them broke in the best way. They talked, and it felt easy, like the conversation had been waiting for them too. Nicole later said in 2017 on Ellen DeGeneres' show that it just flowed. Still, that long pause had already added tension to the romance, because when someone takes their time to choose you, your heart starts filling in the gaps on its own. By the time February 2006 arrived, the bond was no longer a secret. Around the Grammy Awards, they appeared close in public, and the slow build turned into full heat. It felt like the kind of connection people call fate, and at the same time, it carried a shadow that was hard to see from the outside. That is why their wedding looked like a fairy tale, even though the ground underneath it was already shaking. On June 25, 2006, they married in Sydney at Cardinal Soretti Chapel in Manly, in an intimate Catholic ceremony with about 230 guests. Hugh Jackman was there. Russell Crowe was there. Nicole arrived in a cream Rolls-Royce, and her father, Dr. Anthony Kidman, walked her down the aisle. Keith came in a silver BMW. Outside, helicopters circled as fans screamed, and Nicole even waved as she stepped in, knowing the world was watching. They exchanged vows at dusk, and the photos looked magical. Guests whispered that it felt like the two of them were the only people in the room. And yet, under the glow of that perfect day, Keith's sobriety was already cracking. He had relapsed in secret while Nicole was away filming, so the wedding did not end the struggle. It simply placed a crown on top of it, and the weight was about to fall. Only 4 months later, the dream took a sudden turn that could have ended everything. On October 19, 2006, Keith checked into the Betty Ford Center for a 90-day rehab stay after relapsing on drugs and alcohol while Nicole was filming in Kosovo. Nicole flew from Rome for a surprise intervention with Keith's close friends, and instead of walking away, she planted her feet and stayed. Keith later said this was the moment that fused them closer. He described it as an implosion he caused, and he admitted he nearly lost everything. Nicole visited weekly and made it clear she would walk through recovery with him. Around this time, gossip also swirled, including rumors of cheating before the wedding with model Amanda Wyatt. But what mattered most inside their marriage was the simple reality that Keith had to fight for his life and his home at the same time. When he came out sober, it did not erase what happened, but it changed what happened next. In a way, it proved their love was not just about the red carpet. It was about showing up when it was ugly, when it was scary, and when the future was not promised. Then, slowly, the story shifted from survival to building something that felt like healing. Their first daughter, Sunday Rose, was born naturally on July 7, 2008 in Nashville. For Nicole, it was more than a happy moment. It was a miracle that came after years of deep pain. Earlier in life, she had suffered an ectopic pregnancy at 23, and later a miscarriage that she described as massive grief. So when she became pregnant at 41, she even stepped away from a film called The Reader so she could carry the baby. They named her Sunday, and Rose came from Keith's grandmother, Rose, and also from art patron Sunday Reed. It was personal. It was tender. It felt like a door opening after a long time of being locked. Later, their second daughter, Faith Margaret, arrived through a surrogate on December 28, 2010. They kept it quiet until the Golden Globes, and Nicole called the baby a gift after the fertility battles. People whispered, as people always do, but inside their home it was not a headline. It was a family being built with patience and stubborn hope. Then another kind of heartbreak arrived, the kind you cannot plan for and cannot fix with love alone, even if love tries. On September 12, 2014, Nicole's father, Dr. Anthony Kidman, died in Singapore at 77 after a fall while visiting her sister Antonia. He reached Tan Tock Seng Hospital but was pronounced dead at 9:54 in the morning. Authorities investigated it as an unnatural death at first, which fed a storm of online rumors and conspiracy talk. None of that changed the real pain, which was simple and brutal. Nicole could not reach him in time, and grief settled into her life for years. In interviews, she has described how Keith carried her through it, not as a gesture, but as a daily act of support. Still, a loss like that leaves marks, and it reshaped her strength in ways she did not ask for. As the years went on, Nicole did what she has always done when life cuts deep. She used the pain in her work, and she let it show, even when it hurt to show it. In 2016, she stepped into the film Lion, playing Sue Brierley, the Australian woman who adopted Saru, a little boy from India who boarded the wrong train at age 5 and ended up about 1,000 miles away, surviving on the streets. Nicole, who had adopted Isabella and Connor during her marriage to Tom Cruise, felt the story in her bones. She broke down crying on set during the motherly scenes because Sue's love reminded her of her own. She told the BBC she teared up at those beautiful moments. She even admitted she wished for more kids, but Keith shut that idea down fast. At the same time, her real children were rarely seen publicly, and that absence fueled talk for years about distance and influence, especially since Tom Cruise's ties to Scientology were often linked to the family's complicated history. Whatever the truth of those private relationships, the role became something like therapy for Nicole, and it earned her another Oscar nomination. Then, in 2017, she delivered one of the most haunting performances of her career in Big Little Lies, playing Celeste Wright, a woman living in a glossy Monterey mansion with a charming husband, Perry, while hiding brutal abuse behind perfect makeup and polished smiles. The violence was not softened. It was not made pretty. One of the most shocking scenes was the bathroom assault, filmed with such raw intensity that Nicole later said she felt humiliated and devastated afterward. She channeled fear, shame, and rage, and the performance sparked conversations all over the world about how abuse can hide behind wealth, beauty, and manners. The series became a massive HBO hit, and Nicole won major awards, but none of that glamour mattered in those scenes. What mattered was the truth in her face. Around the same time, she also changed the game behind the camera. Nicole launched Blossom Films and used it to co-produce Big Little Lies, refusing to sit around waiting to be chosen. She secured the rights to Liane Moriarty's novel early, then teamed up with Reese Witherspoon and took control of the story's shape. She promised to work with 18 female directors and pushed hard for gender equality, partly because of the sexist conversations she had heard for years in the industry. Blossom Films had already been behind projects like Rabbit Hole, and later helped fuel more work, giving Nicole a new kind of power. She was no longer only the face on the poster. She was the person moving the pieces. But even with that power, the public still tried to tear her down when they felt she stepped out of the box they built for her. When she was cast as Lucille Ball in Being the Ricardos in 2021, backlash hit before the film even arrived. Social media exploded with complaints that she looked nothing like Lucy, and the anger turned ugly with petitions and threats. Nicole nearly quit. Director Aaron Sorkin begged her to stay, insisting he needed her spirit more than a perfect match of features. Every day brought hours of prosthetics, and she worked through the pressure anyway. By the end, the performance earned her another Oscar nomination, and the noise did not disappear, but it lost its power because the work spoke louder. That same year, she went in a completely different direction, and she made it unsettling on purpose. In 9 Perfect Strangers, she became Masha, a Russian wellness guru with a calm voice and a sharp edge, running the Tranquillum Resort. Nicole shaved her eyebrows and committed to the accent, and she stayed in character so deeply that she reportedly kept a cold distance on set to protect the mood. Masha seemed like a healer at first, but then the story twisted. She dosed smoothies with psychedelics, pushed guests into breakdowns, and revealed a dark past that included a near-fatal shooting. The show became a huge hit for Hulu, and Masha's calm facade made her even scarier because it looked so controlled while everything underneath was chaos. Then Nicole stepped into fashion, and even that came with controversy. At 54, she became a face of Balenciaga from 2021 into 2024, fronting campaigns that put a woman over 50 at the center of a high-fashion brand, which sparked debates about age and beauty. At the same time, the brand faced a major scandal tied to a campaign involving children and inappropriate props, along with wider backlash about how the brand handled imagery and legal references. People argued loudly about what it meant for celebrities connected to the brand. Nicole stayed in the campaigns, and the public argued even louder, turning her into a symbol in a fight she did not start. And then came 2024, when Nicole returned to a role that made people gasp and then argue all over again. In the film Baby Girl, directed by Helena Rhine, Nicole plays Romy Matis, a 49-year-old chief executive running a New York robotics firm. She is married to Jacob, a theater director played by Antonio Banderas, and they have 2 daughters. Her life looks perfect until it begins to crack. It begins with a small moment when a young intern, Samuel, played by Harris Dickinson, saves her from a stray dog. Then he pushes past the line you are not supposed to cross. He chooses her as his mentor, then propositions her boldly, flipping the power dynamic in a way that shocks her and pulls her in at the same time. Romy starts meeting him in hotels, and the attraction turns into a kind of submission she has never allowed herself to feel. The story does not treat it like a glamorous fantasy. It shows guilt, fear, and the way desire can pull people into places they do not recognize. Samuel starts breaking boundaries. He shows up at her home. He dates her assistant, Esme, played by Sophie Wilde, and the situation turns sharp when Esme uses what she knows to pressure Romy to end it. Romy confesses a toned-down version of the affair to Jacob, and it sparks a brutal confrontation. Even Samuel ends up hugging the panicking husband in a moment that feels wrong and strange and unforgettable. Romy tries to return to her marriage, even reigniting rough sex with Jacob, while still fantasizing about Samuel, and the film keeps pushing into taboos, including humiliating moments like a milk-drinking submission scene in a bar, crawling like a dog, and punishments that strip away her control. When Nicole spoke about filming, the conversation exploded again. At the Venice Film Festival, she admitted the intensity affected her physically, and she said there were moments when she felt overwhelmed by it, even burned out. The quote went viral overnight, and the reaction split into anger, mockery, and praise. Some people called it embarrassing. Others praised her honesty about female desire and shame. Nicole also described long rehearsals and careful planning with intimacy coordinators, and she said the set was built around trust because the scenes demanded it. Helena Rhine chose Nicole on purpose for that exact reason. She wanted an actress who would not run from the shame in the role, and she believed a younger star might not dare to do it. Nicole read the script and wanted it immediately, with no softening and no safety edits. Rhine also drew from real stories, including women who had spent decades in marriages without pleasure. And she said the film was meant to be gritty and real, not glossy. She even spoke openly about the age gap, with Nicole 56 and Dickinson 27, arguing that women are not trapped anymore. By the time 2025 rolled in, the public story of her marriage began to change again. In late September 2025, major outlets reported that Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban had separated after 19 years, and the tone of the coverage was striking because it was not a loud scandal. It was described more like two lives pulling apart under the weight of time, travel, and separate schedules, with reports saying Nicole did not want the split and had fought to keep the marriage together. What made it feel even sharper was how quickly the legal steps followed. Reports said she filed in Nashville at the end of September 2025, and by January 6, 2026, multiple outlets reported the divorce was finalized. The details people argued about online were not the point. The point was that after nearly 2 decades, the thing that once survived a relapse, and all the pressure finally ended in silence. The kind of ending that leaves everyone filling the gaps with guesses. And then came the first time Nicole spoke in a way that felt like an answer, even though she avoided giving one. In a Variety interview published in March 2026, she did not lean into drama, and she did not try to win the internet. She centered her daughters and repeated the line that sounded like the only thing she wanted the world to hear, that they are a family, and they will continue to be one. It landed because it was simple, and because it was clearly a boundary. Whatever happened between husband and wife, she was drawing a circle around the girls and saying the story would not touch them. In that same stretch, She hinted at how hard the previous year had been, describing a version of herself that pulled inward while the cameras stayed outside. And then she flipped the mood with a promise that sounded almost like a personal dare. She framed 2026 as a year of moving forward, not as a performance for anyone, but as a decision. The message felt clear without being cruel. She was not disappearing, and she was not waiting to be rescued by a new chapter either.